Today on This Week in Iowa, celebrating Black History Month, Iowa is steeped in history. A mining town in Buxton, nearly all integrated 100 years ago to a mansion in West Des Moines that served as a staff on the Underground Railroad. Plus, Ankeny's first Black chief of police, his experience, his hope for the future. Soul to start this Sunday. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being with us on This Week in Iowa. I'm Sabrina Ahmed. A step back in time at a full house at the Des Moines Public Library as Iowans celebrate Black History Month. Local 5's Carson J.S. Reichart tells us why a Monroe County mining town is still important today.
There may not be much to look at right now, but believe it or not, a little over 100 years ago, this was the site of a thriving coal mining town right here in Iowa. Welcome to the lost town of Buxton. It's not the easiest place to find. What's left of the town is off a minimum maintenance road in Monroe County. Many Iowans might not have even heard of it.
One conversation I had with my grandmother mentioned that her father ran the store in Buxton, the general store.
Martha Bosenberg has family connections to Buxton, but even she didn't know much about the community. That's what brought her out to the Northside Library in Des Moines. Author Rochelle Chase has written 2 books on Buxton, and she was happy to share her findings on what made the town so special.
There's equal access to opportunities, jobs, etc. So you have this happening literally in this small town in Iowa in 1900 where, this is not the norm for that time period.
Buxton was majority Black, as much as 55% of the population. At a time of widespread segregation in America, the town was largely unique for being almost completely integrated. Black and white miners lived and worked alongside one another. Today's presentation inspired Bosenberg to do even more digging on her family's connection to the town.
I'm going to look at my great-grandmother's obituary, if I can find it, and find out about what her father's name was and which side of the family was involved in the Buxton general store.
So what's the big deal about Buxton in 2022? Chase says that there's still a lot to learn from the mining town. Giving people the tools they need to succeed produces results.
We can also learn, what happens when people are allowed to just thrive, to rise, to be leaders, to live the life that they want to have.
In Monroe County, Carson J.S. Reichart, Local 5 News, we are Iowa.
During the early part of the 1900s, African American students weren't allowed to live on campus at Iowa State University. So a local couple stepped up, offering them a home away from home. Local 5's Khalil Maycock spoke with a granddaughter of this couple who says it warms her heart knowing all her grandparents did.
This registered historic landmark once belonged to Archie and Nancy Martin. The couple, both born into slavery in the South, moved to Ames in the early 1900s, building this in 1919.
They were quiet. They were people with faith.
Mary Martin Carr, the granddaughter of Archie and Nancy, says that she has fond memories of her grandparents. She says during those years of being around them, she heard and saw amazing things, witnessing her grandparents give African-American male students enrolled at Iowa State University a place to stay, especially during a time when an unofficial rule didn't allow them to live on campus.
My grandparents lived in a first-floor bedroom. And then there were dorm-like rooms upstairs in the second story. Valued education because they didn't have that privilege.
Archie and Nancy opened their doors to the male students during the 1930s and 40s. It's unclear how many students stayed above them during those years, but Ames History Museum suspects around 20.
The Martins did their part to help these kids get their education and really were kind of surrogate parents to them. I know there's even stories of them, buying simple things like shoes and stuff for people that came to town and didn't have those simple, life necessities.
And the Martins and 7 other African Americans who were influential in Ames are now on display in an exhibit at the museum called Black Trailblazers. Carr says it's exciting knowing others will get to read about the legacy her grandparents left behind.
We're glad they're honored.
The exhibit, including the Martins and 7 others, is up for several more months, and it's free to the public. And in 2004, a residence hall at Iowa State University was renamed Archie and Nancy Martin Hall. We'll be right back. has many black trailblazers. Among them is the first black woman to pass the Iowa bar and practice law. I sat down with Leo Landis, the state curator for the State Historical Society of Iowa, and he shares her story and the other stories of historic Iowans.
Des Moines and Iowa had some really prominent black lawyers. And so George Woodson was in that group. He was actually meeting with W.E.B. Du Bois at the Niagara movement. You've got Charles Howard, you've got a handful of others, but two that I'd like to talk about today are Gertrude Durden Rush and James B. Morris. And of course, there's the sculpture dedicated to the National Bar Association that's here in Des Moines, just off of Grand at 2nd Avenue. And they're two of the people who are commemorated in that. Gertrude Rush is the first black woman to get a law degree, or at least pass the Iowa bar, I should say that. She studies here in Des Moines. Her husband had been a lawyer, and so she passes the Iowa bar in the 19-teens, and then she is prominent in creating that national network of black lawyers, the National Bar Association, and she usually works with black clients. And so when you talk about trailblazers in the black community in Iowa, Gertrude Durden Rush is really significant. And a lot of your viewers may know James B. Morris's story. Another prominent black Iowan here in Des Moines who comes in the early 1900s. By 1910, by the 1910s, he sets up a law office, but then World War I starts. So he enlists and trains as a black officer at Fort Des Moines, comes back, purchases the Iowa Bystander, is one of the black lawyers who founds the National Bar Association, but he's taking on important cases in our city, like that of Archie and Audra Alexander in 1944. Archie Alexander had been a football player for the University of Iowa. He had grown up mostly in Des Moines, and he and Audra were looking to purchase a home in the Chautauqua Park neighborhood just off of Hickman Road, and that neighborhood had a restrictive covenant. James B. Morris takes on the case and says, you know, restrictive covenants don't have a hold. And what a restrictive covenant means for your viewers, I think most of them know, but it was explicitly written into a sales contract that blacks could not purchase homes in that neighborhood. So not only was there redlining in Des Moines, but there were sale clauses that say you cannot sell to a black client. And that's the racism that blacks in central Iowa faced explicitly in the 1930s, 40s, and in this case with Archie and Audra Alexander and James B. Morris being their lawyer.
Talk to me about the impact that had then. If these restrictive covenants existed, these rules that were specifically written to discriminate against black people, and then these black attorneys fought them, how long did it take for a lot of those to go away? And I mean, do we still see some of that today?
What you do see is even in the 1960s, in spite of federal and state legislation trying to allow equal housing, is in 1964, a religious group in Des Moines coordinates a black couple going to try to rent apartments in Des Moines and then sends a white couple in right after them. And in multiple instances, in 5 or 6 test cases in March of 1964, the black couple is told, oh, we don't have a room right now. And then just minutes afterwards, a white couple will show up and be told, oh, we can rent a room to you, sure. So there was still discrimination in housing, both in rentals and even in neighborhoods across central Iowa and in Des Moines specifically through the 1960s and into 1970s. So the challenge for equal housing and that inherited wealth that so many people get through housing was still a challenge for blacks in central Iowa through the 1960s and 70s.
Is there anything specifically that stands out that, you know, made there be more equality?
I think it's the generational change. I mean, you will see in the 1940s and 1950s and even 1960s resistance to embracing diversity in our city. And so when urban renewal is taking place, it's the Center Street neighborhood in the 1960s that's disrupted And certainly the homes at Oak Ridge are an important affordable housing option, but it really destroyed the wealth of a number of businesses who had been in that area, as well as people who owned homes. So the challenge of inherited wealth through the Black community in central Iowa certainly represents the stories that happen across the nation. And it's something, as I'm a historian, so I don't talk about so much what we should do, though I think as people, as city officials plan or county officials plan, looking at affordable housing and finding ways to help people have inherited wealth through the succeeding generations is certainly been a historical challenge and something to be aware as housing planning is done today.
We just mentioned a few notable Black Iowans, but of course we mentioned there are so many more. So where can we turn to learn more about these Iowans?
Sure. The State Historical Society of Iowa, of course, we tell a number of stories. We have a civil rights video in Iowa that we've posted on YouTube through our channel. We've had a number of Iowa History 101 programs as well. And our exhibit galleries talk about stories like Alexander Clark and the First Colored Regiment of Iowa. Also, the McKee family, who your colleague Khalil Maycock did a great piece on last year. That was really as far as I know, the only Black farm family in Dallas County. So, but the African American Museum of Iowa in Cedar Rapids is great. A lot of people have those stories as well, but would say, feel free to reach out to us if you have a story you want told, or if you're looking for information.
Over the past couple of years, progress in our country and in Iowa has been questioned. Coming up, the president of the Iowa NAACP explains that work still needs to be done. Every year we celebrate Black History Month, but that doesn't automatically fix the inequalities still in our communities. I sat down with Betty Andrews, the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. She explains the work still needed.
Here with Betty Andrews, who is the president of the Iowa-Nebraska NAACP. Betty, thank you so much for being with me. I know that we've spoken a lot about some integral figures in Black history in Iowa, but I'd like to speak a little bit more conceptually. How far have Black people come in our state? They have definitely gone through their fair share of tough times.
Absolutely. And I don't think that the plight of African Americans in Iowa is vastly different from the plight of African Americans in this country as a whole. So when we think about the things that we have had to endure over the years, slavery, Jim Crow laws, all of the economic exclusion and education challenges and so many other things, I believe very strongly that that is a result of our history of racism and our history of just thinking of, and I say our, but actually it wasn't my history in terms of thinking of people as less than human, which was unfortunate. And we are still fighting that systemically yet today. The good thing is that we have definitely moved forward. We have seen a lot of changes over the years through the work of African Americans, but also through the work of all people. And so that's been really good to see. But we've definitely got a lot of room for improvement.
I want to talk just for a moment, over the last 2 years, because there was that huge social justice movement that began in 2020. Have you seen that bar moved forward more in the last 2 years than maybe it did in other times?
I think it acted like a rubber band. So, of course, the death of George Floyd definitely spurred a lot of people into action. And what we saw, not only from the African American community, but from the community at large, what that did was at least shine a light on the plight of African Americans and just put America in the position that you saw, how it was putting its proverbial knee on the neck of the African American community. And so what we saw was a lot of activism around that. And we also saw, a lot of times people don't note this, but we saw a lot of people who were concerned and may not have been of African American descent, but wanted to do something. So you saw an uptick in diversity and inclusion officers being hired. You saw an uptick in different programs and things like that. But unfortunately, some of that is kind of being retracted. So that's why I said it's kind of a rubber band effect. So now we're seeing a rise in some of the things that we saw like on January 6th of 2021. And we're still struggling with that. And it kind of puts people in a position where we take 2 steps forward and have to take 3 steps back. So, but definitely it allows us to keep pushing.
What would you say are the biggest things that the NAACP as a whole, but also you personally, want to see improved upon? I know that's such a big goal, but just a couple of those measurable items that you work toward every day.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite quotes is Dr. Martin Luther King saying the arc of justice is long, but it moves toward justice. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it moves toward justice. And certainly justice, what that looks like to us is, number one, addressing the disparities in our communities. So when we talk about economics, African Americans have 1/10 the wealth of their white counterparts. That's a huge disparity, but those disparities even grow when you talk about education and, of course, criminal justice disparities and even the interactions. And those are not by chance. These systems over years were built to kind of put that neck hold on people. And so as we are fighting to change that, we have to look at kind of a overarching just address it in a way that is overarching. And so it's not just a little thing, but dealing with, if we could improve economics, if we can improve the criminal justice system, that would be progress.
Now, we're here having this conversation because it is, in fact, Black History Month. And often when we think of Black history, we think of the past and we think of it's the Civil Rights era and the Civil War era. But there's obviously so much more that has happened since then and more needs to be done. What do you want everyday Iowans to be thinking about when they think about the context of Black History Month?
Sure, and I think that's a really good question for all Iowans, because a lot of times you hear people say, well, we'll celebrate Black history during Black History Month. And the truth is, it's not just the only time to celebrate Black history, but it is the time to lift it up. Kind of like holidays or opportunities to kind of, for Valentine's Day, say you love someone and that kind of thing. So it's just a moment to take time out and to address it. But as we're doing that, we absolutely have to remember that Black history happens every day. And so what we encourage people to do is definitely lift it up during Black History Month, but then also just live like you understand that Black history happens every month. And what I mean by that is that African American history is every American's history. So when African Americans often do things, America can celebrate because it's about our collective history.
We speak to the first Black police chief for Ankeny, why he says he's in an important position with his historic achievement. We are excited to introduce you to a trailblazer at Ankeny Police. Chief Darius Potts is the department's first Black police chief in history, and he hopes to make a difference as well as inspire the next generation. Here's Local 5's Chinuher.
This is going on my 4th year.
Chief Darius Potts has only been in Ankeny for a few years, but step into his office and you see an illustration of his 30-year career, from old badges to pictures Chief Potts has spent most of his career in Arizona until becoming the leader of Ankeny Police 4 years ago.
It's been cold. No, it's been a great experience. I think I'm very fortunate to have this job.
When he became chief, he made history in Ankeny, becoming the city's first black police chief.
It was a whole bunch of emotions. You know, one, for being a chief, that's an accomplishment in itself, and being the first African American chief, that's a big deal too. So I knew what roles I had to play, and I knew what position I was in.
His position became more personal for him the last 2 years as tensions between black and brown communities and police grew following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis.
I've been a cop all my adult life and been African American all my life. When those two things collided, you know, a couple of summers ago, that was a very difficult time.
But Chief Potts knew he needed to have those conversations.
How did you navigate that conversation if you talk to like younger people or people in one space or the other?
You know, there's a lot of navigating, and there's a lot of going and talking to people, talking to my officers, talking to my family. There are people out there that I respect that keep me in check and remind me of who I am and what I need to do.
He says what he wants to do is make a difference through a job he loves and keep caring for the community he serves. With his historic accomplishment, he hopes to inspire the next generation.
I hope they see me as an example. I hope they see that we can get to this leadership level.
It was a stop on the long and treacherous road to freedom, an Iowa house with a story to share as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. We got a private tour of the Jordan House in West Des Moines, which once served as a stop on the Underground Railroad. It was built by James Jordan, who was a Virginia native and one-time slave catcher. Jordan was so appalled by the experience, he became a fierce abolitionist. In Iowa, he became known as the chief conductor for Polk County. This house is now open for tours, reminding people of our country's history. We'll be right back. You're watching This Week in Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us here for this special edition of This Week in Iowa, celebrating Black History Month. You can find a whole lot more wonderful stories at weareiowa.com. And don't forget, we have a podcast. Have a great weekend.